Speak through these words if they're worthy, Lord. And if they're not, then speak in spite of them. Amen.
Amen.
All the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." I used to be the leader of a street gang. It's the truth. Now, it's a longer story, and it isn't at all what it sounds like, but I like to say it like that because it sounds kind of cool. So before you call the bishop to tattle, let me tell you the rest. Picture the scene, or as Prince would say, dig, if you will, the picture. It's the 1980s, and it was a neighborhood of houses, not projects. Most of us lived in two-parent family, single-family houses, and we were all middle income or higher. We called ourselves the emperors, and we are 10, 11, 12 years old. And we roamed the streets of this neighborhood of middle-income, single-family homes in Memphis, Tennessee. We roamed them, that is, until the street lights came on and our moms and dads called us in for dinner. But let me tell you the ethos of this gang, the emperors. Our threshold for entry was a very low bar. Our initiation process was not difficult. All you had to do was ask, and poof, you became an emperor. The only caveat was you could not be a member of our club and a member of another street club or gang, which was not hard to accomplish because there were no street gangs in the Canada Gardens neighborhood of the Whitehaven community in Memphis. Not at that time, at least. And we were all best friends, low threshold for entry. And because we would go to the ends of the earth for each other, it could be said that it was hard to exit our gang, but not quite like the mafia. If you weren't around, we kept looking for you to play ball until we found you. And the only way you could say, "No, I'm not playing," was if you were grounded. And then one day, David wouldn't come outside. And our community, our bond, our thicker-than-thieves street clique was challenged in a way it had never been challenged before. You see, it turns out David's mom and dad wouldn't let him hang out with us anymore. David had started going to a very good and private school. We figured maybe that was the problem. You see, at that time, we were all public school kids. Every day for a couple of years, David's mom would drive past us in the neighborhood. And even though her car windows were up, back then you rolled them up like this. Even though her car windows were up like the Pharisees and the scribes, she would grumble at us, but she grumbled with her eyes. And so for the first time ever in his 3 weeks of existence, the emperors had lost a family member, and there was no joy in Mudville in those days. Now, today's gospel reminds me a little bit of David's mom, keeping him from our communion of diehard friends. You'll remember it says all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus, and the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." Ooh, how scandalous. Now, I've been told, and I've come to believe, that more often than not, if my participation in a faith community is not scandalous, then maybe it's not really, truly Christian. I figure if ministry does not raise the eyebrows, or if it doesn't raise the hackles of other so-called religious people, then maybe you're not doing it right. That is, as long as you're not just doing it for the hackles raising sake, as fun as that can be. But I find that this passage validates that for me. The Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." I don't know about you, but that sounds to me more like an endorsement than an indictment. As one of our beloved Canterburyans recently said in our midst, something to this effect, those of you who were there, I know this is not an exact quote. They said, "I'm overjoyed to have been saved from the religious community I was in, and I feel certain that I am on the right path, especially when I anger the already angry church folks of the community I've left behind." So a word about the word sinner and lost. I think most of us shouldn't use the word sinner at all. In these days, it denotes shame. And shame actually has no place in a healthy and holy environment. And by the way, this click here, this is a happy, healthy, holy environment. Shame has no place here. Shame's a loaded weapon, and it is unnecessary to God's purposes, especially since so often we find it in the hands of the wrong person anyway. And I think most people of faith, when asked, would tell you that, especially because it's in the Bible, and especially because Jesus said it, and especially because Jesus did it throughout his life, you and I are indeed to welcome sinners and to eat with them, period. Full stop. Now, most Christians, I think, will agree that you and I and all of us are supposed to make community of faith with anyone and with everyone who desires to be in communion with us. Remember, the ones Jesus spoke of were the ones who came and listened. I think we are too called to make faith communion with anyone who desires to be in it with us. Anybody who seeks the relationship with God that Christ offers us, I think we're called to be in relationship with them. Now, the rub comes where some Christians will disagree, sometimes very loudly, over who is the preferred type of sinner that the church should seek out to welcome. So the line reads, "All the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus." So again, notice the ones who are preferred by Jesus are not the religious high rollers who are at this table. The ones who are preferred by Jesus are the ones who simply came to listen. The ones he preferred were the ones who were seeking. And so all of these so-called sinners who Jesus sees as seekers are likely the same people that the passage alludes to in the phrase lost. Now, my mom had a bumper sticker on her car. It read, truthfully, most of the time, "Don't follow me, I'm lost too." Well, for me, that wasn't advice that I would ever follow. Okay, I did not ever follow my mother because she did get lost a lot. But when there have been times when I was not sure where I was, and I wasn't sure where I was going, physically, emotionally, spiritually, metaphorically, well, I would look for someone who I knew or who I recognized, and I would latch on to them. And they go, "Hey, don't hang on to me, I'm lost too." And I said, "Hey, we might be lost, but now we're not alone." So the use of the word lost and sinners always rests uncomfortably on our modern ears. And I contend that if you like to use those words, then you are the main one who should not use those words. I've come to learn one thing. I don't appreciate someone trying to call me out on my behavior that doesn't meet their standards. I'm just fine with my so-called doubtful reputation. Thank you. But I do find it liberating to remember that whatever they call me describes all of God's children. Yes, so if I'm lost and a sinner, so are they, and so are we all. All of God's children, the ones that I admire, the ones that I like, the ones I confess that I do look down on, full confession. Even the ones I couldn't care less about. You and I and all of us are equally in need of God and each other. So if you're one of those who doubles down on the term sinner and lost, fine. Just remember that you're every bit of that as I am, and that you and I stand on equal footing in the eyes of our God, who loves us both dearly and deeply and equally. So I think it can be important for you and for me to see ourselves as sheep who sometimes do wander away, whether by intentional adventure or because we weren't paying attention. Because after all, God knows not all who wander are lost. I think the part that I like about being a wayward sheep is that God always stops the presses to come and find me and carry me back into the fold on shoulders. The passage said that too. And God comes and gets me, not because I'm bad so much, but because I was alone. It's interesting to me that God doesn't spend as much time with the 99 unadventurous sheep. God is always bringing us back into the fold. And so maybe now that God has come to us, we are found, but not so much because we were lost. We're found because we're back with the other lost ones who love us too. It helps me sometimes to see myself not only as a sheep, going with this story, but also as a coin. Sometimes it helps me to see myself that, like a coin, maybe I'm lost in the cracks one way or another. I've come to think that often enough in the world that we live in, those of us who are lost in the cracks are those who the world overlooks or forgets. But in the kingdom of God, kingdom, no G, kingdom of God, the God who loves us never overlooks us and never forgets us. The people who love us, just like God, they see us and they look for us too. They rejoice when they reunite with us. The loved ones that the world we live in calls lost, in my opinion, really are not in all that bad a shape. We know that we can get lost. We know that we need God and others. We desire to be with God, and we desire to be with those who love us, precisely because we know that. For us to be complete and whole and holy, we all need the kingdom God makes for us. I think the ones who might be in some trouble are the ones who grumble. Full confession, I look at unaffirming Christians and I grumble. I need the kingdom just as much as every other Christian on this globe. But when I grumble, I'm in trouble too. Thank God, Christ comes to find us every time we grumble and walk away. We're welcome to wonder. We're welcome to wander, even to grumble. It's just that God didn't make us to do it alone. God reminds us that not all who wander are lost. Sometimes the ones who refuse to wander are the ones who are lost. Sometimes God calls us to move when our faith calls us to, and refusing to move in faith gets us out of the fold sometimes too. Going back to the 80s, because I know you've been dying to hear the resolution of David and the emperors, I wish that I could tell you that we went to the edge of the earth to get David back into our fold. But we were young teenagers, and we did not know that we were creating the story that I would use 40 years later for a sermon. So we didn't do what you might have thought we could have done. Now, don't get me wrong. Sometimes we would go by his house and we would knock and we would invite him out. But we never used love to draw him out. We thought cliquish anger was all we needed to compel him. Even still, once David was older, old enough to pick his friends, David wandered back across the street to Steve's house, another emperor. And while the emperors hadn't lasted in name as a club for more than a few weeks, we found ourselves reminiscing of old memories and soon enough creating new ones. All of us who wander are not lost. God follows us to the ends of the earth to bring us into a fold where we are loved by others in the kingdom. As another Canterburyan recently said, let us reach out to take the joy that God is presenting us. Amen.